Hi there, Tony DeWitt here, Missouri appellate attorney and a guy who likes to make the law make sense on YouTube. Today we're going to talk about closing argument, and specifically the closing argument in the Caitlin Armstrong murder trial. For those of you who may not have been following all the way through that trial, that's a case where a professional cyclist killed, not allegedly, it's been proved now, she killed her romantic rival, who happened to be another professional cyclist, while that woman was staying with a friend of hers there in the city of Austin, Texas. So at this point, the state has made its closing argument, and it's laid out the evidence that supports conviction. It only took them about 35 minutes to do that because there wasn't a lot of evidence to lay out, and although there were probably, I think, 5 days of trial, when you distill that down for a closing statement, it doesn't make for a particularly long closing statement. And I thought the attorney who did the state's opening part of the closing argument did a fine job laying out all of the reasons for conviction. So now it's the defense turn, and the evidence is in. You're not going to be able to change the evidence, and you're not going to be able to make the jury unhear it. The only thing you can do is explain it. And I had a mentor in the law early on in my career who said that the best thing to do is to keep the evidence out, because if it comes in, you have to explain it. And when you explain things, you're losing. And I think there is a little bit of truth to that when you start explaining things, you sort of do appear to be whining about how bad the evidence is for you. And I think that may be the case here. But at any rate, the only thing that the person can do who is arguing the case at this point is explain the evidence. So it actually presents a problem for both sides. So the prosecution has to explain where they lack evidence. They don't have evidence for this or that, so they have to offer an explanation for why they don't. And then the defendant has to explain away the circumstantial evidence. Now, there are always going to be evidentiary gaps, and defendants are always going to attempt to explain that. And one way to go about explaining that is to ask questions, to do what actually law professors do in a law classroom, is use what's called a Socratic style to go about arguing the case. Where's the bloody knife? Where's the fingerprints? Where's the DNA? Where's all these questions that you can ask to illustrate the evidence that the state doesn't have? But there is a problem with that, and we'll get to that in just a moment. Before we get there, though, I want to talk about the difference between style and substance. Now, there was a plaintiff's attorney that I knew who practiced out in Wichita, and the guy had more gold chains than anybody I've ever seen. And he had this big straw hat that he wore, and he always wore this to the trial lawyer meetings. And I guess he did it sort of as a kind of branding, when you saw that big straw hat and enough gold to, make him look like an Inca warrior, you would sort of know who that person was. But his style spoke a lot, but whenever he got into the courtroom, he left all of that window dressing off, and he went to the substance, and it was the substance that won cases. Now, he was a very eccentric guy, but when it came to arguing in the court, he knew how to talk to people, and he knew how to do the kind of thing that the defense attorney did here, which is ask questions. But style is the how of the presentation, right? It's whether you use PowerPoint or you talk from notes. It's whether you ask questions or whether you get up and pound the table. Style is important, but substance is far more important, because substance is the gravitas of what the attorney is saying. Which brings me to an issue. An attorney who argues in court without having any credibility is a guy singing off key in the shower. Everybody knows the tune, but no one is impressed. To dream the impossible clean, to fight the unbeatable grime, to scour where the brave dare not scour. Well, just the other day, I did a video on consciousness of guilt as evidenced by flight. And that was an issue that came up in the Armstrong trial. Now let's take a look at the closing argument of the defense. As I have said before, you have to get caught telling the truth at least 3 times to gain credibility with any listener. Now here, what the attorney is going to do here in a little bit, he's going to start asking all of these questions about the evidence the state doesn't have and questions he thinks the state can't answer. He'll ask these questions and then he'll try to offer counterfactual explanations for the evidence that's in. It could have been extremely powerful, but this segment right here is what made those arguments just fall completely on deaf ears.
Good morning, folks. The state bears the burden of proof, and so the district attorney speaks first in opening and closing argument, and then they speak last. My name is Mr. Kofer. It's been a privilege to represent Caitlin Armstrong. I'll visit with you a little bit, and then my colleague, Mr. Purrier, will visit with you. When we sit down, Mr. Gonzalez will have the opportunity to speak with you. 1 year, 4 months, and 12 days. That is how long Caitlin Armstrong has asserted her innocence. And from day one, she asked for this trial. She asked for you to hear this case. You have all done extraordinary work.
Here's why that whole argument falls flat. On May 11th, 2022, that's when Wilson was murdered. On May 12th, Armstrong was arrested on a theft warrant and questioned by the police. On the 13th, she sold her Jeep, and that was the Jeep that was used in the crime. And then on the 14th, she flew to New York, where her sister lives. On the 18th, she flew out of Newark to Costa Rica on a stolen passport, and she remained there. On May 20th, the U.S. Marshals listed her as a fugitive, and in June of 2022, they had tracked her down as far as Costa Rica, particularly a little beach town called Santa Teresa, Costa Rica. And there, she identified herself as Allison, and shortly after she arrived, she got $6,000 worth of plastic surgery. Well, on June 23rd, 2022, the U.S. Marshals slapped the cuffs on her in Costa Rica, which she was brought back to the United States. You would think that would be sort of the end of the story, but it's not. On October 11th, about 3 weeks before trial, she attempted an escape while she was going to a doctor's appointment. And that escape was caught on video by a passerby. And what's interesting about that is that this is 3 weeks before trial. So the entire idea that she's asked for this trial and a chance to clear her name really falls pretty much on deaf ears at this point. Now, in the off chance that any of those comments made by the defense may have resonated with the jury, the state is now going to have its turn to make its rebuttal argument. And again, that's because the state has the burden of proof. They get to go first and last. So they get to rebut all of the things that the defense says. So they're going to throw it right back in the defendant's lap. And because I think the lawyer who's arguing here didn't like the personification in the defense's jury argument, I think he's going to throw it right back, and you'll see all of these questions are directed at Rick, who I believe is probably the defense counsel here. So they're going to start with the most significant portion of the evidence, the flight from prosecution.
But Rick, why is the defendant's Jeep in the alleyway? But Rick, why is the defendant driving around Maple Avenue for over an hour? But Rick, why does her Jeep start up more or less 2 minutes after Mariah Wilson is killed? But Rick, why does the defendant have a 9mm pistol that even the defense expert says is possibly the murder weapon and who the state's expert says is the murder weapon? But Rick, why does the defendant sell her Jeep, which we all know is evidence in a murder investigation, the day after she's told it's on video? But Rick, why does the defendant fly out of the United States using a fake name and a stolen passport to a different country where she uses fake names and goes and gets plastic surgery?
Now, you often see one side or another develop a style or employ a method at court, and then you see the other side take that style or take that method and they run the ball with it. And that's what the state's attorney did on rebuttal. All those questions the state supposedly couldn't answer, they trusted the jury to remember the evidence. But what about all those questions the defendant couldn't answer? And now the defendant has opened the door to this critical attack on its weakest point, the fact that she ran like a scared cat at the first sign the cops were on to her. And we all know what happened. She was convicted and sentenced to 90 years in prison. She won't be getting jealous or dating anyone if and when or if she gets out. At her age, a 90-year sentence is effectively a death sentence. She'll be eligible for parole at some point, but it's not going to be for a long time. I guarantee you that no amount of makeup is going to cover the amount of wrinkles that she will have when she gets out of prison. So that's what I have for you today. I hope you found it interesting. You can certainly feel free to email me with any questions or comments. And of course, leave some comments down below. Try to do something nice for somebody today. Thank you very much for watching. Be kind, be thoughtful, and be back here tomorrow and join me in another discussion on the law. If you like this video, here are a few others you might try, and don't forget to subscribe. Have a terrific day, guys.